Before Dak Prescott became an NFL superstar with the Dallas Cowboys, he tore up the college football world and was seen as a guy who changed the Mississippi State football program forever, and he'd have a chance to maybe do something in the NFL. He helped the Bulldogs become the #1 ranked team in the nation, and he was one of the most polarizing players of the decade in both the SEC Conference and college football as a whole. Today we're going to tell the really inspiring story of Dak Prescott, that time he took over college football at Mississippi State, and how he overcame all the odds stacked against him to get to this point and become an NFL superstar. But first, before we get started with the video, be sure to give it a like if you want to support this series, subscribe if you love college football content, suggest another player or topic I should do next, and turn on post notifications so you get alerted every time I upload. Now let's get started and talk about the inspiring story of Dak Prescott.
I've been having hood dreams, ball player, rap star, Billy been taking BMW, I ain't got no black Harley dog faders, 2 twin Glocks to make them shake it like a salt shake. Ain't make it to the league, but I'm still ballin', I was born for this. Never thought I'd see the day when I can make it, should I go legit?
We need to go back in time and talk about how he became a Bulldog to begin with. His real name is actually Rain Dakota, but everyone just called him Dak. He was one of 3 kids in the Prescott family, and they all grew up dirt poor in an area of Louisiana near Shreveport. His mother was a manager of a local truck stop, and the family sadly grew up in a trailer park. It was the field behind the trailer park where Dak learned how to play football, and from a young age, he was good at it. His brothers were all older than him and constantly beating him up and tackling him, as any siblings would do, and Dak would always run to his mother. But she also toughened him up and told him to be stronger and to work harder and to fight back. This is something that Dak would take to heart as he began to play football, and he was a talented young player. Despite working all those long hours at the local truck shop, she always got him to football practice and never missed any of his games. His older brothers were big-time defensive linemen at Houghton High School, but everyone was waiting for Dak to come in. The head coach once told a local fan this, quote, "He told me, you think his brothers are good? Wait until Dak comes around." The coaches were licking their lips when he was in 7th grade. When he eventually got to high school, he didn't start right away, but there was one moment as a sophomore that made everyone know how special of a player he could be. Against their rival with under a minute to go, he completed a flea flicker pass for a game-winning touchdown, and the legend of Dak Prescott was born. From his junior year on, he started and excelled. By the end of his high school career, he had thrown for more than 5,000 yards and 66 touchdowns, and he also ran for 950 yards and 17 touchdowns as a senior. One fan said, quote, "He was as good as advertised and played like a man amongst boys. He was bigger than everyone else and was almost impossible to bring down with just one player. He was a spectacular player on the field, but where was he going to go to college?" Well, it came down to Mississippi State and LSU, and he'd eventually commit to the Bulldogs because he loved the staff and the campus. Mississippi State head coach Dan Mullen had this to say about him, quote, "I saw a young man with an unbelievable work ethic and a desire to be great in everything he does. I saw that when I was around him. He just has a drive to be great." No one thought he'd be great outside of the Mississippi State coaching staff, but they would soon find out and know his name. According to 24/7 Sports, Prescott was a 3-star recruit, the number 20 dual-threat quarterback, and the 601st best player in the class of 2011. Coming into Starkville, the Bulldogs were under head coach Dan Mullen, and they were led by quarterback Tyler Russell. Dak would redshirt his first year, and going into 2012, he was going to be Russell's backup. As a backup to him in 2012, he would play in 12 total games, completing 18 of 29 passes for 194 yards and 4 touchdowns with no picks. He'd also rush for 4 scores on the ground as well, with 110 yards on 32 carries. He was the backup guy going into 2013 as well, except in their game against Oklahoma State, Russell took a knee to the head and would leave the game and leave the team for good pretty much. Prescott came in for the remainder of the contest, and although he didn't play well, he was going to be the guy for the future. In his first start against Alcorn State the following week, he threw for 2 touchdowns and ran for another one on the ground. On the road against Auburn, he showed his potential as he threw for over 200 yards and had over 100 rushing yards as well, with 2 scores on the ground in their loss. For most of the season, he was more of a force running the ball, but he occasionally had a good game through the air. He struggled mightily in their final regular season game against rival Ole Miss, but they won in overtime and would go on to make a bowl game. He threw for a career-high 3 scores in the win over Rice in the Liberty Bowl, and he was named the MVP of the game. He threw for 1,940 yards, 10 scores, and 7 picks, but also ran the ball for 829 yards and 13 touchdowns. Led by Prescott, Josh Robinson, and Darunya Wilson, the Bulldogs had a talented 2014 offense, and some people thought they could do well. We got to go back and touch on an event that would change his life for good. This actually happened before the Liberty Bowl. His mom had cancer for a while, and by the time the 2013 season had ended, her condition had grown a lot worse. But the only thing that kept her going during that year was being able to watch her son play football, and no matter how sick she was at every game he played and was Dak's #1 fan. She eventually couldn't walk, but that never stopped her, but cancer did become too much in the end, and the end was really near. Sadly, the most influential person in Dak's life passed away right when he was starting to become a star, and Dak would take it to heart. His mother would die of colon cancer, and he had this to say about it. Quote, "I learned so many lessons from watching my mom fight cancer. And I just think toughness, mental toughness in particular, was one of the main things I've taken. And I try to use every day and never show weakness. It just showed me how mentally tough one person can be." He always remembers her and plays for her, as after he scores a touchdown, he always points to the sky in honor of his mother's legacy, and that was a tradition that began at Mississippi State after his first score when she was away. Obviously, he cares deeply about his mother, and it motivated his play as he was the MVP until Week 4 against number 8 LSU. He threw for almost 300 yards and 2 touchdown passes, plus over 100 yards on the ground in a score, and he led his team to a huge road win, and they jumped into the top 25. Things didn't get any easier, as the following week they had number 6 Texas A&M at home, and after Dak had 2 passing touchdowns and 3 rushing touchdowns, they beat the Aggies and jumped up high into the polls. Then the following week they had number 2 Auburn come to town, and after 3 touchdowns, they won the game and moved into number 1 in the country. Dak was seen as the frontrunner of the Heisman Trophy, and this was the first time in school history the Bulldogs were at the top of the polls. They'd spend 4 weeks there and beat Kentucky, Arkansas, and Tennessee Martin in the process, with that Arkansas game being a close one, but then they had the matchup of the year in the SEC West with number 5 Alabama on the road, and this was a winner-take-all showdown for the SEC West. Sadly, this was a classic game, but Prescott's 3 picks were too much, and they lost the game and were on the outside looking in for the West. They lost to their arch-rival Ole Miss in the last game of the year, and they ended up going 10-2 on the regular season. They'd still get a good bowl game as they went to the Orange Bowl, but they lost to Georgia Tech, and just like that, the world had kind of already forgotten about Dak Prescott and the Mississippi State Bulldogs. He was a first-team All-SEC selection as he threw for 3,449 yards and 27 scores, along with almost 1,000 yards on the ground and 14 scores. He decided to come back for another year in 2015, and he was spectacular, but he didn't gain as much hype as he did in 2014, and there's a reason for that. During the 2015 season, he became the 4th player in FBS history to pass for 60 touchdowns and also rush for 40 in a career. He had the 3rd longest passing streak without an interception and put his name all over the SEC and Mississippi State record books. He accounted for a school record 7 touchdowns against Arkansas, but the season wasn't amazing for the Bulldogs. Dak went 0-4 against ranked teams, and every time they would jump into the polls, they lost and went 8-4 in the regular season. He finished his Bulldog career with a win over NC State in the Belk Bowl, but some were disappointed with his performance and how everything played out in 2015 for the team. He passed for a career-high 3,793 yards and a career-high 29 touchdowns, but he was not as explosive on the ground as he only had 588 yards and his touchdown number dropped to 10. He was arguably just as good or better in 2015, but he didn't win any meaningful games, and he kind of peaked in 2014, it seemed. Going into the 2016 NFL Draft, no one saw this guy as a franchise quarterback, and people were skeptical that he could become anything in the NFL. As we all know though, Prescott was drafted by the Dallas Cowboys in the 4th round with the 135th overall pick, and people were excited about it. The Cowboys had failed to trade up to get Paxton Lynch or Connor Cook earlier in the draft, so they had to settle for Prescott. Yeah, I wouldn't call that a settle. As we all know, Romo would get injured, and then Dak went off, and now he's become one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. Today's video is not about his NFL career though, so we will end it here, and it was a lot of fun getting to go back and relive the entire Dak Prescott Mississippi State football era. He is by far the best quarterback in the school's history, and he truly was on top of the college football world for a while, and that run that Mississippi State had is one of the more memorable runs of this decade in my opinion. He was a lot of fun to watch, and I really hope he comes back even better than ever after that terrible injury, and I just have a lot of respect for his story and where he is now. To make matters worse, his brother died earlier this year, and that must be really hard on him, but Dak will fight through it, and I know he's one of the most mentally tough dudes on the planet. Let me know what you guys think. Did you think Dak Prescott would be good in the NFL when he was drafted, and what do you think about his time at Mississippi State? Let me know another NFL superstar I should take a look at next, and check out all my other Before They Were Star videos, including my video about Patrick Mahomes before he was a legend. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.